One night, the god Odin had a dream. He dreamed that he was inside a cave of red stone. But when he examined the walls, he found that they were soft and wet. And as he looked closer, he found he could see through them into the other side, and what he saw there was a forest of fir. And beyond that fir, there were stars. And as those stars began to go out one by one, he realized that he was not inside a cave at all, but inside the belly of a gigantic wolf. And then a fist of darkness closed around him, and he gave one great cry, but that cry made no sound. And he awoke. It was morning. The birds were singing their first songs. His wife, the goddess Frigg, was asleep in the royal bed beside him. He got up and he walked from that bedroom and through his palace. Shafts of light were just coming through the windows. And then he went to a spiraling staircase and went up that staircase to the top of a high tower. And at the top of this tower, there was a great throne that was open to the air. And he sat in that throne and he looked far out. Mist was rising from the forests of Asgard. And then 2 ravens came and landed on his shoulders. He knew them well. Their names were Huyin and Munin, thought and memory. And he whispered a command, and they went out into the air and spread their thunderous wings, and flew far out through all the 9 worlds of this universe, to see all they could see, and hear all they could hear. So a day passed in Asgard, and Odin descended and went to Gladisheim with his wife Frigg, and all the other gods were there as well. And there was singing and carousing and arguing, and stories were told. And so the day passed. A day as beautiful as a drop of rain dangling from a branch after a rainstorm. And then at twilight, Odin returned to his palace. And he went up again that spiraling stair up to the top, and he sat in that great throne. The sun was going down far off, and the ravens came and they landed on his shoulders. And in raven language they whispered to him, and they told him everything they had seen and everything they had heard. And this one said, I saw a woman running through a field holding a knife. I saw 40 men singing in a room. I saw a boat and it was on fire. I saw a small boy whittling a stick into the shape of a boat. I saw an apple tree in blossom. I saw a lizard eat a fly. I saw a dying man write his last wishes on a piece of paper. I saw a man repairing a violin. I saw a great snowstorm in the mountains. I saw an ostrich running across a desert. All these visions, everything they'd seen in that day, was communicated to Odin in raven language. And he took it in and he understood it all. But nothing they said explained to him his dream, or told him if that dream was in fact a real thing, a true event that would soon happen, or just a fantasy of the night. He said a word and the 2 ravens flew off to their perches. And Odin stood up from his chair and descended down the spiraling staircase to his palace. And he went to the great door, and he took a walking stick from beside the door. And then he walked out into Asgard. The sun was going down. The stars were just coming out. And then Odin began to walk. And he walked across the green grass of Asgard. He walked past the fortress of Thor, a fortress covered in spikes and shields and bristling with flags. He walked past the palace of Odin, the goddess of all growing things. A palace filled with the sound of trickling water. A palace filled with green leaves. And after some time he came to the great wall around Asgard, and to the great watchtower there, where Heimdall watches at all times. Heimdall, the god who has 9 mothers, the god who can see grass growing on distant mountains, and hear wool growing on the back of a sheep. And Odin said a word, and the great gates opened, and he stepped through them and onto the rainbow bridge. A bridge of snarling light, a bridge of shattering voltage in all colors. He climbed up that bridge, and around him the stars hissed and sang in their old rhythms in the sky. And the darkness itself seethed and swam and coiled itself around those stars. And it seemed to whisper ancient things to itself. So he walked across that bridge, and then the bridge began to go down, and he came down in Middle-earth. Middle-earth, where we live, the humans. And he wandered through Middle-earth as a shabby traveler in a ragged cloak, keeping to the shadows, the gutters, the alleyways of our world. And once 3 travelers, who were warming themselves over a fire they'd made out of a broken chair, found that they were joined by a fourth man who had a big hat on and you could hardly see his eyes. And this man listened to their stories. But when they asked him for a story, he was no longer there. So Odin walked across Middle-earth in the darkness, for it was night. And then he came to the great tree at the center of all things. A giant ash tree, Yggdrasil it is called. And he found a narrow trail along the side of that tree, and he began to descend. And sometimes it was a narrow trail, and sometimes it was just handholds in the side of that tree. And he had to descend like a mountain climber, dangling there, feeling with his feet for a place to put his step. But he went down and down around that tree. He went past the realm of the frost giants, Jotunheimr it is called. Past the realm of ice, past the realm of fire, where Surt, the fire giant, waits with his great sword made of blazing fire. Past the realm of the underworld, where the dead go. Until finally he came to a place that was all roots. And he took one of those great roots for a trail and walked down it, curling around and around, that root itself like a question that becomes its own answer, like a song that becomes the silence after it and includes that silence, like the silence that is itself a great song. Down and down he went, until he came to a place of dripping water. It was a great cavern, a dark cavern. Those stars were reflected in the waters there, for it was filled with water. And he stepped forward along that trail until he came to the edge of that great water. And then a man stepped from the shadows, and he said, "I am Mimir, the guardian of the well of wisdom at the bottom of the world. Who is it who comes here? What do you seek?" And Odin stepped out of the shadows and into the starlight, and he said, "I am Odin, the great organizer of the world. I have come here because I seek knowledge. I wish to drink." And Mimir looked at him and said, "Those who drink must first make an offering to these waters." And Odin, without hesitation, said, "I will give you whatever you ask." He did not haggle, he did not bargain, he simply said those words, "I will give you whatever you ask." And Mimir said, "I think you must give me your left eye." So Odin, without hesitation, took the fingers of his hand and he dug them into his left eye socket. And he took hold of that eyeball, the wet eyeball, and he twisted it out and plucked it from his eye and held it in his open palm. And he bent down and he placed his eyeball in the water, and it descended into the depths. And Odin stood up, and with blood trickling from his left eye socket, he looked at Mimir. And Mimir took a great drinking horn from his belt, and he bent down and he filled it with that sparkling, clear water. And he handed it to Odin, and Odin drank. And as he did so, The memories of every man or woman who had ever lived entered his body. For it is said that when the dead go down to the underworld, they cross the great river, and their memories are taken from them. They wander ever after as empty shells, ghosts of what they were. But their memories are not destroyed. They go into the water and they flow to the great well of wisdom at the bottom of the world. So Odin drank in that wisdom, and all those moments entered his body, a carpenter measuring a board, a woman in childbirth, a farmer holding a ripe peach in his hand, a sea captain looking out at a storm at sea, a woman playing the harp. All these moments entered his body. And not only that, but the memories of the animals as well, the birds, the raccoons, the elephants, the tigers, the flavor of a deer in a lion's nostrils, the sweet, beautiful feeling in a raven as it flies over a mountainside, and the dreams of the stones and the trees as well. The stones remembering the first fire in which they were born, a snail crafting its shell over many years, the water, the fire, the earth, the air, all of these memories and sensations went into his body. And he saw also the future. And he saw again that red moment in the belly of the wolf, clenched in that belly. And he knew that that was a true moment and that it would come to pass. And he saw all the gods die. He saw their bodies in Asgard devoured by fire. He saw Gladisheim, that great, beautiful hall, devoured by fire itself. He saw the ashes rising, obscuring the sun. And then he looked, and he saw Mimir. And Mimir said, "Have you seen?" And Odin said, "Yes, I have seen." And Odin handed the drinking horn back to Mimir, and then he began to walk. And he took that winding trail up the side of the great root of Yggdrasil, the tree at the center of all things. And he ascended past the realm of the dead, and past the realm of fire and the realm of ice. Winding his way, he went past Jotunheimr, the realm of the frost giants. Before long, he came again to Middle-earth. And he wandered once again through our world, through Middle-earth, where we live, with our broken forks, and our wallets, and our arguments, and our roses. He wandered through that place as a shabby traveler in a ragged cloak, visiting only the corners of the cities, the alleyways, hearing all he could hear and seeing all he could see. And then he came to the great Rainbow Bridge. It was there, rooted in a forest of oak trees. And he set his feet upon that bridge, and he began to walk. And the bridge was a snarl of many colors beneath his feet. It was humming with voltage, sparkling with voltage. And around him, once again, he saw the stars in the sky, cool and hot at the same time, like ancient stories, like nails driven into the great table of this universe. And the darkness itself seethed and coiled and swarmed with voices. And the stars hissed above him as he crossed that bridge. And then far off he saw the great tower of Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, and he saw the walls of Asgard. And he walked across the green grass of Asgard. It was mid-morning, the sun was rising, the mist had lifted from the distant pine forests. The apple trees, the pear trees were sparkling and bright in the morning sun. And once again he walked past the fortress of Thor, a great castle covered in spears and shields. once again he passed the palace of Eden, the goddess of growing things. And then he came to the great golden hall of Gladysheim, the great hall of the gods. And the doors of that beautiful palace opened, and Odin entered in. And Odin's wife, Frigg, welcomed him to that hall, and he went inside, and all the gods were there. Bragi, the god of song, Thor and his wife Sif with the golden hair, Eden, the goddess of growing things, Loki was there as well, and Njorth and Freya and Freyr, they were all there. And there was a great banquet table, and it was filled with food. They had roasted an ox. There was mead from many places, the distant places of the universe. There were fruits. There were cakes and breads of all kinds. The candles were lit. Odin looked, and he took in the sparkle of that moment. And then Thor said, "Odin, we must have a toast." And Odin stood up and raised his drinking horn and looked at all of the gods there, happy in that moment. And he remembered again the red belly of the wolf. He felt the clench of that belly around him, and he saw again all the gods dead in a field, devoured by fire. He saw that very hall he was standing in, Gladysheim. He saw the ashes of that hall rising up, obscuring the sun. And then he said, "A toast to this moment." And the gods answered him with their voices and drained their glasses, and they all sat down to enjoy a delicious feast. And when that feast was over, when they were all content in body and mind and heart and soul, when the god Bragi, the god of song, had sang his last song and put his harp away, then they all retired to their own palaces. And Odin and Frigg retired to their palace, and they went to the great royal bedroom there, and they lay down to sleep. And Frigg fell asleep first, for darkness had covered the world, because the stars had come out. Odin lay awake for a while in that darkness, and then he too closed his eyes, and he slept. And in that sleep, Odin dreamed.